The first time my son told me, I no longer had a say in my own home. He did it while standing between me and my front door. I remember the exact sound my key made when it wouldn't turn. A dull metallic click, followed by nothing. No give, no welcome, just resistance. I stood there on the cracked stone porch with grocery bags cutting into my wrists, staring at a lock I didn't recognize. Behind the door, I could hear laughter. Not loud, casual, comfortable. That was when I knew something had already gone terribly wrong. My name is Margaret Hale. I am 62 years old, and that house in Willow Creek, Indiana, was built with my hands, my money, and the best years of my life. Or at least, it used to be. Daniel opened the door just wide enough to block me with his body. He didn't hug me, didn't even step aside. He looked past me, down at his phone, like I was a delivery he hadn't ordered. "Mom," he said, sighing, "you're early." Early. As if I needed permission to come home. Behind him, Lauren leaned against the hallway wall, arms crossed, lips curved into a smile that never touched her eyes. She was wearing my sweater, the one I bought last winter after my knee surgery. The one she once said made me look tired. "I couldn't get the lock open," I said, my voice thinner than I wanted. "Did something happen to the door?" Daniel hesitated. Just long enough. "We changed it," he said. It made sense. The bag slipped from my hands. An orange rolled across the porch and bumped into my shoe. "You what?" Lauren pushed off the wall and stepped closer. She smelled like my lavender soap. "Margaret, don't make this dramatic," she said softly. "We just needed more security. The neighborhood's changing." I laughed, a short, broken sound. "This neighborhood hasn't changed in 30 years. Daniel finally looked at me then. His eyes were flat, impatient. "Things change, Mom. People change. And this house is too big for just you." I felt something shift under my feet. Like the ground itself had decided I no longer belonged on it. "I live here," I said. "I own this house." Lauren tilted her head. "Of course you do. But Daniel lives here too, and now I do. We're a family." Family. That word used to mean protection. Now it sounded like a verdict. They let me inside, eventually. Not because I insisted, but because Lauren glanced at her watch and said they were running late for dinner with her parents. Inside, my living room was unrecognizable. My armchair was gone, replaced with something low and stiff that hurt my back just looking at it. The framed photos of my late husband were missing from the mantel. In their place hung a large abstract print I'd never seen before. "Where are my pictures?" I asked. Lauren smiled. "We put them somewhere safe." Daniel was already heading down the hallway. "We'll talk later, Mom. Just try to be flexible." Flexible. At my age. In my own home. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed, listening to unfamiliar footsteps, cabinets opening, drawers closing. At one point, I heard Lauren laugh and say, "She won't fight us. She never does." That was when the open loop cracked open inside me. Because she was wrong. The next morning, I went to the small office off the kitchen where I kept my documents. My house deed, my will, the proof of everything I had built after my husband died and Daniel was still a boy with scraped knees and soft hands. The filing drawer was open, and the folder was gone. I knew they had taken it before I even checked the drawer. There is a certain quiet that settles into a room after something precious has been violated. It isn't loud panic. It's colder than that, heavier, like the air itself is holding its breath. I stood there for a long time, one hand resting on the edge of the desk, staring at the empty space where my life's proof used to be. The deed, the will, the documents that said I mattered. When Daniel came into the kitchen, I was still standing there. "Did you take my papers?" I asked. He poured himself coffee like I'd asked about the weather. "We needed to organize things," he said. "You keep everything so scattered." "My papers," I repeated. "Where are they?" Lauren appeared behind him, already dressed for work, tapping at her phone. "Margaret," she said, not looking up, "you shouldn't stress yourself out. Stress isn't good for your heart." I stared at her. "You don't know anything about my heart," she smiled. "Exactly." Daniel set his mug down with a sharp clink. "Look, Mom, we've been talking." Those words again. "We." "This house is becoming a burden for you. You can't keep up with it. The repairs, the bills, the stairs. I manage, I said. I always have. Lauren finally looked at me then. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. But should you? The question landed where it was meant to, right in the soft place behind my ribs. Daniel reached into a drawer and pulled out a folded document. My handwriting stared back at me. "We found your will," he said. "It's outdated." My stomach dropped. "Give that back." "You left everything to me," Lauren said, reading over his shoulder. "That's sweet, but unrealistic." Unrealistic? As if my life were a draft that needed editing. "We think it's time to update things," Daniel continued. "Make them more fair." Fair. The word scraped. "You mean for her?" I said quietly. Lauren didn't deny it. "We're married now," she said. "What affects Daniel affects me. And frankly, it's irresponsible for you to cling to assets you can't fully utilize." Assets. She called my home an asset. "I want my papers back," I said. Daniel shook his head. "Not until we're done." That was the moment something hardened in me. Not anger, not fear. Something older. Something my grandmother once called backbone. "You don't have the right," I said. Lauren laughed softly. "Rights are funny things. They depend on who tells the story." Later that afternoon, I drove to work. I have worked at the same local insurance office for 14 years. I process claims. I notice details. I listen when people think I'm invisible. And that day, my supervisor called me into her office. "Margaret," she said gently, "we received a complaint." I sat down slowly. "From whom?" She slid a paper across the desk. "From Lauren, accusing me of cognitive decline, of confusion, of being unfit to manage my own affairs. She's concerned about you," my supervisor said. "As family." Family again. I smiled. A thin, careful smile. Because in that moment, the pieces finally connected. They weren't just taking my house. They were building a case to erase me. And as I walked out of that office, clutching my purse with shaking hands, I made a decision I hadn't planned, but somehow had been preparing for my whole life. If they wanted to tell a story about me, I would make sure it ended the way I chose. And they would never see it coming. That night, I did something I had not done in years. I stopped trying to be understood. Instead of confronting Daniel or Lauren, instead of begging for my papers back or arguing about my sanity, I sat at the small dining table with a legal pad and wrote down everything I still controlled. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I owned the house. That was fact, whether they hid the deed or not. The property taxes were in my name. The utilities, too. The insurance policy I'd renewed myself every year since my husband passed. And most importantly, I still had my mind. They wanted to paint me as confused, fragile, declining. So I began behaving exactly the opposite. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Not the soft sweaters Lauren liked to criticize, but a structured blazer I'd worn to court once years ago, when my husband's estate was settled. I did my hair, put on lipstick. I wanted witnesses to remember me clearly. My first stop was the county records office. The clerk was a woman in her 40s, with tired eyes and a nameplate that read, Susan. I smiled at her, like someone who belonged there. "I need certified copies of my property deed," I said calmly. "The originals are temporarily misplaced." She looked up. "Name, Margaret Elaine Hale." She typed, paused, looked again. "You're the sole owner," she said. "Yes," I replied. "I know." The sound of those words steadied me. I left with copies, sealed and stamped. Proof that couldn't be rewritten by family drama or manipulation. From there, I went to a lawyer's office I found online. Not a fancy firm, just a small practice run by a woman named Patricia Moreno, who looked at me like a person, not a problem. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "What your son and his wife are doing is coercive control, and hiding your legal documents crosses into criminal territory." My throat tightened. "So I'm not crazy." She shook her head. "You're being targeted." The word hit harder than betrayal. "What do I do?" I asked. Patricia smiled slightly. "You let them underestimate you." She helped me file a formal notice, asserting my sole ownership of the house. Nothing explosive, nothing dramatic, just paperwork. Quiet, official, unignorable. "Do not show this to them yet," she advised. Timing matters. When I came home, Lauren was in the kitchen reorganizing cabinets I had already organized 100 times. She glanced at my blazer. "Job interview?" she asked lightly. "Something like that," I replied. Daniel was sitting at the table, scrolling through his phone. "Mom," he said, without looking up, "we need to talk tonight about your future." I smiled at him. A real smile. "I look forward to it." That night, they sat me down like a child between them on the couch that still hurt my back. "We're concerned," Lauren began, "about your ability to live independently." Daniel nodded. "It's time to think about assisted living, or at least downsizing." I listened. I nodded. I asked questions. I played the part they expected. Inside, I was counting steps, planning angles, waiting. Because while they were busy imagining my exit, they never noticed what I was quietly preparing. And the trap they were building for me was about to become theirs. Thanksgiving arrived, like a test I hadn't studied for, but refused to fail. Lauren insisted on hosting. Her parents flew in from out of state, loud and confident, and already treating my house like a stage set for their family photos. I stayed mostly silent, watching. At the dinner table, Lauren raised her glass. "I just want to say how grateful I am that Margaret has been so open to change." Her mother smiled at me with pity. "It's hard getting older." I folded my napkin carefully. "It is." After dessert, when the wine had loosened tongues and attention spans, Lauren made her move. "We actually have some news," she announced. "Daniel and I are expecting." Gasps, applause, congratulations. Daniel looked stunned. Not unhappy, just unprepared. Lauren squeezed his hand. "And that's why it's so important we make decisions now, for the baby." Her eyes flicked to me. "This house will be perfect for raising a family." The implication settled heavy over the table. I stood up slowly. "I have news too," I said. They looked at me, surprised. "I filed official notice asserting sole ownership of this property," I continued evenly. "And I have begun legal proceedings to reclaim any documents taken from me without consent." Silence. Lauren laughed. "Margaret, this isn't the time." "Oh, it is," I said. "Because you announced a future that does not belong to you." Daniel stood. "Mom, you're embarrassing yourself." I met his eyes. "You did that when you chose manipulation over respect." Lauren's father frowned. "Is this true?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "I also documented attempts to undermine my employment," I added, "including false reports regarding my mental health." Lauren's smile finally cracked. "This is insane," she hissed. "You're doing this on purpose." "Yes," I replied. "I am." Patricia had warned me. The first confrontation would be ugly, but it would also reveal everything. I walked to the front door and opened it. "Dinner is over," I said. "All of you should leave." Lauren stood frozen. "You can't kick us out. This is our home." I looked at her belly, then back to her eyes. "No," I said quietly. "It never was." Behind me, Daniel's breath came fast and shallow. "Mom," he whispered, "what have you done?" I turned to him, heart aching but steady. "I finally chose myself." And as they gathered their coats in stunned silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not victory, clarity. Because this was only the beginning. They didn't leave quietly. Lauren's mother cried in the entryway, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Her father muttered about ungrateful elders and family loyalty. Daniel stood frozen between them, pale, like a man watching two versions of his life collapse at once. Lauren was the last to step outside. She paused at the threshold, one hand on her stomach, the other gripping her coat. "You think you've won," she said softly, "but you just made everything worse." I met her gaze. "No," I made it clear. When the door closed behind them, the house fell silent in a way that felt unfamiliar. Not empty, exposed. My phone rang less than an hour later. It was Daniel. "I don't understand why you're doing this," he said. His voice was raw. "We were trying to help you." I sat in my old armchair, the one they hadn't yet managed to throw out. "Help doesn't come with threats." "She's pregnant," he snapped. "Do you know what stress does to someone in her condition? And do you know what betrayal does to a mother?" I asked. Quietly. He didn't answer. The next few days were a blur of tension and preparation. Lauren posted carefully worded messages online about toxic parents and generational trauma. Mutual acquaintances stopped calling. Others suddenly started checking in. I let the silence work for me. Patricia called on Monday morning. They responded. My stomach tightened. And? They're denying everything, she said. But that's expected. What's interesting is that Lauren contacted your employer again. My hands clenched. About what? She's claiming you're unstable and retaliating. I closed my eyes. Of course she is. Patricia's voice remained calm. We documented that too, including timestamps. And something else. What? She filed paperwork trying to register residency claims on the property. The audacity almost made me laugh. She can't, I said. She's not on the deed. Correct, Patricia replied. But it tells us how far she's willing to go. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the house, touching the walls, the banister, the kitchen counter I'd scrubbed 1,000 times. Every corner held memory. Every room whispered a version of me that had survived worse than this. At 3 a.m, I sat at the dining table and wrote Daniel a letter. Not to send, just to bleed the words out of me. I wrote about his father, about the nights I worked double shifts, about the choices I made so he wouldn't have to. I wrote about the moment he chose comfort over conscience. When I finished, I folded the paper and put it in a drawer. Some things don't need to be read to be real. The following week, a notice arrived in the mail. Lauren was suing, not for the house. She knew she'd lose. She was suing for emotional distress, for alleged manipulation, for interference with her marriage. I stared at the envelope for a long time before calling Patricia. She's desperate, Patricia said after reading it. This is a pressure tactic. What do? We let her hang herself with her own narrative, she replied. And we prepare. I hung up and looked around my quiet house. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my name, and I was done being polite. The deposition was scheduled for early December, just weeks before Christmas. Lauren chose the date. Of course she did. The room was sterile and cold, with fluorescent lights that made everyone look harsher than they were. Lauren sat across from me in a tailored dress, hands folded protectively over her stomach. Daniel sat beside her, silent, eyes hollow. Her attorney smiled too much. Mrs. Hale, he began, can you describe your relationship with your daughter-in-law prior to this conflict? I breathed slowly, distant, increasingly hostile. Lauren shifted in her seat. Hostile how? By removing my belongings, by withholding my legal documents, by attempting to discredit my mental capacity. Her attorney frowned. Do you have proof? Patricia slid a folder across the table. Receipts, emails, witness statements, workplace reports, county records. Lauren's smile vanished. The questioning continued for hours. They tried to paint me as bitter, as controlling, as a mother unwilling to let go. I didn't argue, I explained. I described moments, sounds, words spoken in kitchens and hallways, the way Daniel avoided my eyes, the way Lauren smiled when she thought she was winning. At one point, Lauren's attorney asked, Isn't it true you feel replaced? I looked directly at Lauren then. I felt erased. Daniel flinched. When it was Lauren's turn, the room shifted. She spoke confidently at first, about boundaries, about safety, about concern. Then Patricia asked, Why did you remove the deed from Mrs. Hale's office? Lauren blinked. We didn't remove it. We safeguarded it. Without her consent? She forgets things, Lauren said sharply. She's not reliable. Patricia nodded. Is that why you contacted her employer? Lauren's jaw tightened. I was worried. And is that why you attempted to establish residency rights without ownership? Silence. The judge leaned forward. Lauren's narrative unraveled, thread by thread. By the end of the day, Daniel looked like he might be sick. Outside, in the parking lot, he approached me alone. I didn't know she went that far, he said quietly. I studied him, the man he had become, the boy he once was. You knew enough, I replied. Tears welled in his eyes. I never meant to hurt you. I believe that, I said. But belief doesn't undo damage. The lawsuit was dismissed a week later, with prejudice. Lauren lost more than her case. She lost credibility. At work, among friends, even within her own family. The house was quiet again as Christmas approached. But this time, The silence felt earned. And as I hung a single ornament on the tree my husband and I once decorated together, I realized something important. This wasn't just revenge. This was karma, arriving exactly on time. Christmas morning arrived without ceremony. No laughter in the hallway. No hurried footsteps. No forced cheer. Just quiet snowfall outside my kitchen window, and the steady hum of the heater I had paid for, repaired, and learned to fix myself when no one else would. I woke before dawn, not because I had somewhere to be, but because my body no longer trusted peace to last. That kind of vigilance doesn't disappear quickly. It lingers, in the muscles, in the breath, in the way your ears strain for sounds that no longer come. I made coffee and sat at the table alone. At 8:30, my phone buzzed. Daniel. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said quietly. "Merry Christmas," I replied. There was a pause. Then, Lauren moved out. I closed my eyes. Not in relief, not in triumph. Just acknowledgement. "When?" I asked. "Last night," he said. "She went to her sister's. She said she needs space, that you poisoned everyone against her." I let out a slow breath. Daniel. People don't turn away because of poison. They turn away when they finally see clearly. He didn't respond. "She lost her job yesterday," he added, voice tight. "They said she created liability issues, that her behavior raised red flags." Another silence. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. Karma rarely looks like fireworks. Most of the time, it arrives quietly, with consequences stacked neatly, one on top of the other. "I never wanted this," he said finally. "I know," I replied. "You wanted comfort, and you chose the person who promised it without accountability." He swallowed. I could hear it through the phone. "I don't know who I am anymore," he admitted. That confession landed heavier than any accusation. "You'll have to find out," I said gently. "But you can't do it here." After we hung up, I sat for a long time staring at the empty chair across from me. The one Daniel used to sit in when he was young, swinging his legs, telling me about school. Loss doesn't always come from death. Sometimes it comes from clarity. Later that afternoon, I drove to the cemetery. I brought a small wreath and brushed snow off my husband's headstone. "They tried to take it," I said aloud, feeling foolish and relieved all at once. But I didn't let them. The wind moved through the trees like an answer. When I returned home, there was an envelope taped to my door. No return address. Inside was my original will, untouched, unchanged. I sat on the floor and cried then. Not because it was returned, but because I finally understood how close I had come to losing myself. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. But peace, I would soon learn, attracts its own kind of test. The judge's letter arrived in early January, not about the lawsuit. That was done. This one was about guardianship. Lauren had filed it before she left. A last attempt. A final grasp at control. She claimed I was incapable of managing my finances, that I was isolated, that I posed a risk to myself. I read the letter twice, my hands steady. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was desperate. Patricia confirmed it later that day. "It's weak," she said, "but we'll need to respond formally. There will be an evaluation." "I expected that," I replied. "What do you need from me?" "Nothing you're not already doing," she said. "Live your life. Document everything." The evaluator arrived 2 weeks later. A woman named Dr. Collins. Mid-50s, calm, direct. She sat with me in my living room for 3 hours. We talked about my finances, my routines, my health, my memory, my decisions. She asked why I had stood up to my son. I answered honestly. Because staying silent was killing me faster than conflict ever could. She nodded, made notes. Before she left, she said, "You're sharper than most people I see at your age." I smiled. I had to be. 2 weeks after that, the court dismissed the guardianship petition. Lauren was formally warned against further harassment. Daniel sent me a message that night. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you." I stared at the words, then typed back. I protected myself. That's what matters. Spring came slowly that year. I planted new flowers in the garden. Ones Lauren had once called impractical, too old-fashioned. I chose them deliberately. I joined a book club. Took a part-time consulting role at work. Not because I needed the money, but because I liked being useful on my own terms. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped me while I was watering the plants. "I heard what happened," she said carefully. "You were very brave." I shook my head. I was very tired. Bravery is often just exhaustion, refusing to be ignored. Months later, Daniel came by unannounced. He stood at the end of the driveway, unsure. "I won't come in," he said quickly. "I just wanted to say, I'm starting therapy. I'm trying to understand why I let things go so far." I studied him. He looked older, quieter. "That's good," I said, "for you." "Will you ever forgive me?" he asked. I considered the question. "Forgiveness isn't a door," I said slowly. "It's a road, and I'm still walking it." He nodded, left without argument. As I went back inside my house, I realized something important. Revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about refusing to disappear. And I was still very much here. By summer, the town had stopped whispering. Not because they forgot, but because the story no longer belonged to Lauren. It belonged to me. People at the grocery store no longer looked at me with pity or curiosity. They looked at me with something closer to respect. The kind that comes when a woman survives something ugly without asking to be saved. I noticed it most at work. The consulting role had turned into a quiet authority. Younger employees came to my desk with questions they didn't trust their supervisors to answer. One afternoon, my manager asked if I would consider leading a small internal review committee. "You have good judgment," she said, "and people listen to you." I accepted. Not because I wanted power, but because I had spent too many years being told my voice was obsolete. That same week, Daniel called again. This time, he didn't apologize. He asked for advice. "I'm thinking of selling my car," he said. "Lauren left me with some debt. I didn't know how bad it was." I closed my eyes for a moment. "Did she control the finances?" I asked. "Yes," he admitted. "She said it stressed me out too much." Control wrapped in concern. I recognized it immediately. "Get a financial counselor," I told him. "Not a friend, not family, a professional." He hesitated. "Would you go with me?" The old instinct rose in me, the one that rushed to fix, to soften consequences. I pushed it down. "No," I said gently. "This is something you need to do alone." There was a long silence. Then, "I understand." After we hung up, I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty for choosing distance. Distance, I was learning, can be a form of love when closeness becomes corrosive. A week later, a letter arrived from Lauren's attorney, not legal, personal. She wanted to meet, to talk, to clear the air. I stared at the envelope for a long time before tossing it into the recycling bin. Some conversations are not owed. 2 days after that, I found something odd while sorting old boxes in the garage, a folder I didn't recognize. Inside were copies of emails, financial statements, notes, Lauren's handwriting. She had been documenting me, my routines, my spending, my habits, not to help, to build a case. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. Dates, times, observations twisted into accusations. I brought the folder to Patricia the next morning. Her jaw tightened. "This confirms pattern and intent," she said. "If she contacts you again, we escalate." I nodded. As I left the office, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You ruined my life. I hope you're happy." I didn't reply. Instead, I blocked the number and went home to water my garden. That night, I slept without fear because I finally understood something crucial. I was no longer reacting. I was deciding. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, just as I was finishing a late lunch. It was from the hospital. Lauren had been admitted. Complications with the pregnancy. Stress-related, they said. Daniel called an hour later, his voice unraveling. "She's asking for you," he said. "She says she needs to talk to you. Please." I closed my eyes. For a moment, I was back in that kitchen. The lock, the missing papers, the way she smiled when she thought she had won. Then I opened my eyes. "I'll come," I said, not for her, for myself. The hospital room was bright and too clean. Lauren looked smaller than I remembered, pale, defensive even in weakness. Daniel stood by the window, arms crossed like he didn't know where to put himself. Lauren's eyes flicked to me as I entered. "You came," she said, surprised. "Yes," I replied. "I wanted to see you." She swallowed. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I pulled a chair closer, but didn't sit on the bed. You meant to control me, I said calmly. You meant to remove me. You just didn't expect resistance. Her eyes filled with tears. I was scared. So was I said. The difference is, I didn't try to destroy you because of it. Silence filled the room. Daniel shifted. Lauren has agreed to drop everything. The guardianship, any claims. She just wants peace. I looked at Lauren. Peace isn't something you take. It's something you earn. She nodded faintly. I won't interfere in your life anymore, she said. I promise. I studied her for a long moment. Then I stood. I hope you recover, I said. For the sake of the child. She reached out, but I stepped back. I won't be part of your story, I continued. Not as a villain, not as a victim, not as a tool. As I turned to leave, Daniel followed me into the hallway. Thank you, he said, for coming. I met his eyes. This doesn't reset things. I know, he replied. Outside, the air felt lighter. I sat in my car and breathed deeply before driving home. That night, I stood in my kitchen and realized something profound. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. Finished fighting. Finished explaining. Finished shrinking. And with that quiet ending, I knew the final chapters of my life would be written on my terms. Not as someone's mother. Not as someone's obstacle, but as myself. The silence that followed was different from all the others. It wasn't tense. It wasn't heavy. It didn't feel like something was about to break. It felt settled. Summer faded into fall without drama. Leaves collected on the porch, and I swept them away slowly, deliberately, enjoying the rhythm. My knees still ached, my hands still stiffened in the mornings, but my chest no longer felt tight when I woke up. I no longer braced myself for confrontation before even opening my eyes. Daniel kept his distance. Not the cold distance of avoidance, but the careful distance of someone learning boundaries for the first time. He sent occasional updates. Therapy was helping. He was working with a financial counselor. He had moved into a small apartment across town. Nothing extravagant, just enough. He never asked to come back. That mattered more than any apology. One afternoon in October, I received a letter from the court confirming what I already knew. All matters were officially closed. No pending claims, no guardianship concerns, no property disputes. I placed the letter in the drawer beside my bed and didn't think about it again. That was the true victory. Not needing proof anymore. At work, the review committee uncovered several internal issues that management had ignored for years. When the report went up the chain, changes followed. Quiet ones. Necessary ones. My manager stopped by my desk one evening. You could have retired years ago, she said. Why didn't you? I considered the question, because no one asked me who I was without the roles I served. She nodded, as if that made perfect sense. On Thanksgiving, I ate dinner alone. Not because I had no one, but because I chose quiet over performance. I roasted a small turkey breast, made my favorite sides, and ate by the window while the sun dipped low. I wasn't lonely. I was intact. Later that night, Daniel texted, I hope you're well. I typed back, I am, and meant it. A week before Christmas, a package arrived with no note. Inside was a simple silver bracelet, one I recognized. It had belonged to my mother. Daniel must have found it while sorting old boxes. He must have remembered. I fastened it around my wrist and sat for a long time, tracing the cool metal with my thumb. Healing doesn't come from grand gestures. It comes from small, respectful ones. As the year closed, I reflected on everything that had happened. Not with bitterness, with clarity. I had been underestimated because of my age, dismissed because of my kindness, targeted because people mistook patience for weakness. They were wrong. And the life I was building now was quieter, yes, smaller in some ways, but it was mine. On the first morning of the new year, I stood in my kitchen holding a cup of coffee and watched the light creep across the floor. Nothing dramatic happened. No revelations, no messages, no apologies arriving late like confetti. Just sunlight and breath and the quiet certainty that I had survived something meant to erase me. I thought about the woman I had been at the beginning of this story. Standing on the porch, key trembling in her hand, wondering how she had lost authority over her own life without noticing. That woman feels far away now, not because she was weak, but because she learned. I still think about Daniel, about the child he once was, about the man he is trying to become. I don't know what our relationship will look like in the years to come. I don't rush it. I don't force it. Some things need time. Some things may never return to what they were. And that is not failure. That is truth. As for Lauren, I do not wish her harm. I also do not wish her closeness. Both can exist at the same time. Forgiveness, I have learned, does not require access. It requires release. My house remains just as it always was. Not perfect, not grand, but sturdy, earned, filled with memories I choose to keep and space I choose to protect. I redecorated slowly, hung new curtains, rearranged furniture for my comfort, not anyone else's approval. Each decision felt like a quiet declaration. I am still here. If there is one thing I want you to take from my story, it is this. Age does not make you disposable. Kindness does not make you weak, and silence is not the same as consent. If someone tries to take what you built, not because they need it, but because they believe you no longer deserve it, that is not family. That is entitlement. And you are allowed to say no. You are allowed to fight back. You are allowed to choose yourself. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever felt dismissed, excluded, or underestimated, simply because of your age or your role in the family, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, stories about revenge, betrayal, karma, and the quiet strength of women who refuse to disappear, then please like this video and subscribe to the channel. You are not alone, and it is never too late to take back what is yours.